Her garage door closed at 9:50 p.m. That is the last confirmed image of Nancy Guthrie on record. Not a wave goodbye. Not a phone call. A garage door closing on a quiet Saturday night in the Catalina foothills north of Tucson, Arizona. And then, nothing. 47 days of nothing. Think about that number for a moment. 47 days, not 47 hours, not 47 minutes. 47 days since an 84-year-old woman walked into her home and never came out. 47 days since her heart medication sat untouched on the kitchen counter. 47 days since her hearing aids were found sitting inside that house while she was not. Now think about what has been deployed in those 47 days to find her. Over 40,000 tips processed. More than 10,000 hours of surveillance footage reviewed frame by frame. See the FBI's Phoenix field office working the ground. U.S. Customs and Border Protection activated at the border. Specialized detection units brought into the desert. Genetic genealogy teams engaged. A federal task force operating out of a dedicated federal building. Hundreds of detectives and agents around the clock. 0 suspects named. 0 persons of interest publicly identified. 0 arrests. Now that is the case. And this video is built around 2 specific questions. Both of them live in the title, and both of them are going to be answered here, with facts, with documents, and with a verified timeline. The first question is this: is this investigation stalling because the person who took Nancy Guthrie was that precise, that calculated, that careful, or because something is structurally broken on the inside of this case? Or the second question is this: what does the factual, documented record actually show about the names that keep appearing in this investigation? Tommaso Cioni, Annie Guthrie, Dominic Evans. Not what comment sections say, not what anonymous sources claim, what investigators have actually confirmed, what forensic experts have actually assessed, and what the record actually shows. Because here is what most channels covering this story are not telling you. Those 2 questions are directly connected, and the answer to the first one may determine whether the second one ever gets resolved. On March 10, 2026, the Arizona Republic published an investigative report. That report did not focus on the suspect footage. It did not focus on the ransom notes. It did not focus on the DNA results still pending in a laboratory, and it focused on the man running this investigation. The man who controls which lab receives the evidence, which organizations get access to the search, and which version of events reaches the public on any given morning. His name is Chris Nanos. He is the sheriff of Pima County. And what the Arizona Republic found in his documented record raises a specific question. Not a theory, a question grounded in verified facts, about whether the decisions made inside this investigation reflect the pressure of an impossible case or a pattern of behavior that existed long before Nancy Guthrie's name appeared on a missing persons report. That is one thread, but there is a second thread running through this case simultaneously. A thread that has generated more online speculation, more factual confusion, and more real-world consequences for innocent people than almost anything else in this story. Tommaso Cioni is Nancy's son-in-law. He drove her home on the night she disappeared. He is the last known person to have seen her. He has not spoken publicly about this case. Annie Guthrie is Nancy's daughter and Tommaso's wife. Her car sat in evidence custody for weeks. Dominic Evans is a 48-year-old man who played in a band with Tommaso for years. After the FBI released footage of a masked individual at Nancy's door, crowds gathered outside Evans's home. His family stayed inside with the lights off. He spoke to investigators for approximately 40 minutes and has not been contacted since. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has stated that all siblings and spouses have been cleared. No suspect has been named. Those are the documented facts. This video is going to follow those facts, wherever they lead. If you have been following this case from day one, stay with us. Because what is coming in the next hour covers things most coverage has missed entirely. If you are new to this channel, right now is the moment. Hit subscribe. We cover cases like this with documents and verified timelines, not speculation. That distinction matters more in this case than in almost any we have covered. Drop a comment right now. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? We are going to be here for a while. This is the Nancy Guthrie investigation. And this is where it actually stands. Before the federal task force. Before the 40,000 tips. So before the FBI vans parked outside a quiet desert home in the Catalina foothills, there was a woman who had already survived the kind of loss that breaks most people and came out the other side standing. Her name is Nancy Ellen Long Guthrie. Born January 27, 1942, in Fort Wright, Kentucky, a small town sitting directly across the Ohio River from Cincinnati. She grew up rooted in faith and family. She attended the University of Kentucky, where she worked as a society editor on the campus newspaper, the Kentucky Kernel. She was the kind of woman who showed up, who contributed, who stayed. She married Charles Errol Guthrie on December 28, 1963. Charles was a mining engineer, the kind of career that moves a family across continents without asking permission. His work took them to Melbourne, Australia, where their youngest daughter Savannah was born. When Savannah was 2 years old, the family returned to the United States and set down roots in Tucson, Arizona. That was the early 1970s. For Nancy, Tucson became permanent. She and Charles built a life in that desert city. They had 3 children. Cameron, who would go on to serve 26 years as an F-16 pilot with the Vermont Air National Guard. Annie, a published poet, jeweler, and teacher at the University of Arizona Poetry Center. And Savannah, who would become the co-anchor of NBC's Today Show. Then June 10, 1988 arrived and changed everything. Charles Guthrie died while on a mining exploration trip in Mexico. He was 49 years old. Nancy was 46. Savannah was 16, about to enter her senior year of high school. In the months that followed, Nancy did not retreat. She went to work, or she took a position in public relations at the University of Arizona, specifically so her daughters could afford to attend college there. She worked at that university for nearly 2 decades. She organized a monthly music program that brought live performances to hospital patients and staff. She ran a program introducing Arizona high school students to the medical field. She held the family together with both hands, quietly, without asking to be acknowledged for it. That is the woman who was living alone in the Catalina foothills by the time February 2026 arrived. Her neighborhood sits north of Tucson, pressed against the base of the Santa Catalina Mountains. The roads are wide and winding. Desert brush fills the spaces between properties. Come nightfall, it is genuinely dark out there. The kind of dark you only get when you are far enough from city light that the stars are visible. Nancy described her community in a November 2025 interview as a place where the quality of life was laid back and gentle. She said she liked watching the javelinas eat her plants. She said it with a laugh. By 2026, Nancy was 84 years old. She had limited mobility. She required daily heart medication. She wore hearing aids. She attended a church live stream every Sunday morning without exception. Faith had been the structure of her family since her children were small. Savannah once wrote that the family liked to say God was the 6th Guthrie. That Sunday morning live stream was not casual. It was consistent, documented, known. Her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni. Chan is an Italian-born AP biology teacher at Basis Oro Valley in Tucson. He has worked at that school for more than 15 years. He is married to Nancy's daughter, Annie. On the evening of Saturday, January 31st, 2026, Nancy had dinner at Annie and Tommaso's home. It was a routine family visit. Afterward, Tommaso drove Nancy back to her residence in the Catalina foothills. He dropped her off at approximately 9:30 p.m. That moment, Nancy stepping out of that vehicle at her front door, is the last confirmed sighting of her by anyone outside that house. Tommaso Cioni has not spoken publicly about this case. The following morning, Nancy did not appear for her Sunday church live stream. A member of her congregation at St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church noticed. They contacted the family. Relatives arrived at Nancy's home and searched the property. But no sign of her. Around noon, they called 911. When Pima County Sheriff's deputies pulled up to that residence, here is what they documented. Nancy's cell phone, inside the house. Her wallet, inside. Her car, still in the driveway. Her heart medication, sitting on the kitchen counter, exactly where she had left it, untouched. Her hearing aids, in the house. And at the point of entry. Biological traces confirmed through laboratory analysis as Nancy's. Her doorbell camera had been physically removed from its mount. Sheriff Nanos stood at a press conference the following day and said the words plainly. She did not leave on her own. She did not have cognitive problems, but she was not in good physical health. And what investigators found inside that house confirmed, in his words, that they did in fact have a crime scene. An 84-year-old woman who survived widowhood at 46, raised 3 children alone, built a second career from the ground up, and lived quietly in the desert she loved, was gone. And someone had planned it that way. The doorbell camera was not just removed, it was covered first. That is the detail most people miss. Before the individual at Nancy Guthrie's front door physically dismounted the device from its mount, they pulled foliage over the lens. Leaves pressed against the camera. A deliberate act. A practiced one. And then, according to former FBI Supervisory Special Agent and criminal profiler Jim Clemente, something else happened. The figure appeared to make a small gesture, a signal, off camera, in the direction of someone who was not visible in the frame. That is where this case stops being a missing persons report and starts being something more precisely calculated. On February 10th, 2026, 9 days after Nancy Guthrie was reported missing, the FBI's Phoenix field office released what they had recovered. A knot from the doorbell camera that had been removed from its mount. That device was gone. What investigators retrieved came from the back-end residual data of Nancy's home security system. Fragments, partial files, enough to reconstruct a picture. The footage showed a masked individual standing at Nancy's front door in the early hours of February 1st, 2026. Equipped, prepared, standing still, the way someone stands when they have done this before. FBI Director Kash Patel described the figure publicly as an armed individual appearing to have tampered with the camera. Now look at what the FBI documented about that individual. Male, approximately 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches tall. Average build, wearing a jacket, a ski mask, and gloves. A black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack, the kind sold exclusively at Walmart, visible on his back. A tactical accessory consistent with a firearm holster at his waist, and in his pocket, an antenna-type device. A handheld device that investigators have not publicly identified, but that forensic analysts commenting on the case have noted is consistent in shape with signal disruption equipment. Ask yourself this. You are looking at that footage on a screen inside a federal field office. You see a man who covered a camera before removing it. You see a gesture to someone off frame. You see an antenna device in his pocket. And you notice that a neighbor's Ring camera, mounted on the side of their home facing Nancy's property, went dark that same night, while the cameras on the other side of the house continued recording normally. Just that one side, just that one night. What does that tell you about how prepared this person was? Former FBI Supervisory Special Agent Michael Biasello, reviewing the footage, made a specific assessment. He told reporter Paul Sperry that the gesture visible in the footage suggested a second individual was present off camera. He said that moving an 84-year-old woman with limited mobility from a residence would have required more than one person. Two people, he assessed, coordinated, operating simultaneously. This was not opportunistic. This was planned across multiple visits. Investigators examining the surveillance timeline began focusing on two dates, January 11, 2026, and January 24, 2026, both Saturdays. Both falling within weeks of the night, Nancy disappeared. Law enforcement sources speaking to News Nation and journalist Brian Enton confirmed that authorities had contacted residents near Nancy's home and asked them to review any footage they had captured on those specific dates. The pattern emerging from that review pointed to prior visits to Nancy's property. The FBI was building a timeline that started weeks before February 1st. Four separate major networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN, each reported through their own independent law enforcement sources that the masked individual had appeared at Nancy's door on multiple occasions before the night she was taken. The Pima County Sheriff's Department released a written statement calling that reporting purely speculative. No official confirmation was given, but four networks, four independent sources, one consistent account. And now, here is where the documented record diverges sharply from the online narrative. And that distinction matters in a case like this. After the FBI released the suspect footage, a name surfaced on social media within hours. Dominic Evans, a drummer. A 48-year-old elementary school teacher living in the Marana area north of Tucson. He co-founded a band called Early Black in 2007 alongside Tommaso Cioni and guitarist Walter Goncalves. He and Tommaso had played music together for nearly 2 decades. Online users pointed to his build, his facial hair, a dark mustache and goatee, and what some described as similarities between his physical profile and the masked figure in the FBI footage. Former FBI profiler Jim Clemente noted publicly that a potential tattoo on the right wrist of the masked subject could serve as a critical identifier. As social media users compared that detail to Evans, here is what the documented record actually shows. Dominic Evans spoke with investigators from both the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Department for approximately 40 minutes. He stated he was at home with his family on the night Nancy disappeared. He has not been contacted by law enforcement since that interview. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has stated on record that all siblings and spouses connected to the Guthrie family have been cleared. No one has been named as a suspect. No one has been named as a person of interest. What Evans has been left with is this. People gathered outside his home at night. His wife, Andrea Evans, a school principal, told the New York Times that the family stayed inside with the lights off, telling their teenage son not to come home, who she described being what she called scared numb. Evans himself said simply this: someone had taken his name and attached it to something, and innocent people were getting hurt. That is the factual record on Dominic Evans. Then there is Tommaso Cioni. He was the last known person to see Nancy alive. He has not spoken publicly about this case at length, though he was briefly captured on camera acknowledging people filming near his home in mid-March 2026. Law enforcement has stated he is not a suspect. His wife Annie passed a polygraph examination. Savannah Guthrie has been described by sources close to the family as deeply frustrated by the public speculation surrounding her brother-in-law. But investigators were still asking questions about the weeks before February 1st, still reviewing January 11th, still reviewing January 24th, to still building backward from a garage door that closed at 9:50 p.m. on a Saturday night. And the person who covered that camera with leaves before removing it, that person had already been there before. Before a single detective knocked on a neighbor's door, before a single piece of evidence was bagged and tagged, before a federal task force moved into a building in Tucson and started reviewing 10,000 hours of footage, someone had to be in charge of all of it. That someone was Chris Nanos. And to understand every decision he made in the first 72 hours of the Nancy Guthrie investigation, every call about which lab receives the DNA, which organizations get access, which version of events reaches the public on which morning, you have to go back. Not to last year, not to the last election. You have to go back 50 years. So to a police department in El Paso, Texas, and a 20-year-old kid who walked through the doors of that department in February 1976 and started one of the most complicated law enforcement careers in the American Southwest. Because here is what most of the coverage on this case is not telling you. Chris Nanos was not always the man at the center of a controversy. In the beginning, he was something else entirely. In El Paso, Nanos was assigned to the tactical squad as a decoy officer. His job was to put himself in danger deliberately, to walk into the kinds of situations where drug dealers and street criminals were operating and let them come to him. He was mugged repeatedly as part of the work. A 1982 El Paso newspaper profile described him as someone who moved through that assignment with a kind of fearlessness that attracted attention. And in 1979, he saved his partner's life during an incident serious enough that the Combined Law Enforcement Association of Texas took notice. In 1980, they named him Officer of the Year for the Western region. He won a gold medal for the police boxing team. He was, by every documented account from those early years, a rising star. That part of the record matters, because what comes next is not the story of a man who was broken from the beginning. It is the story of a man whose record shifted, incrementally, then all at once. March 1979. Nanos receives his first documented disciplinary action, a one-day unpaid leave for tardiness. It is minor. Officers accumulate minor infractions. But then July of that same year arrives, and something more significant appears. 2 suspensions in a single week. 1 for a shot fired. A 1 for off-duty gambling. 2 separate incidents, 7 days apart, in the same month. May 1980 brings a 10-day suspension for a violation of rules and regulations significant enough to require 10 days off without pay, though the internal records do not specify the exact nature of the violation. The tardiness infractions continue. Written reprimands begin appearing for dereliction of duty, for making threats, for using a police siren in a manner that violated department orders. In 6 years at the El Paso Police Department, Chris Nanos accumulated 26 separate allegations listed on his internal affairs history card. He was suspended or placed on unpaid leave for a combined total of 37 days. The department, in its internal language, documented a pattern it described as consistent inefficiency. Then March 1982 arrived. A robbery suspect named Carlos Urias filed a formal police assault complaint against Nanos. According to El Paso police records reviewed by the Arizona Republic, Urias alleged that during his arrest, Nanos applied force to him in a manner that resulted in Urias requiring care in the intensive care unit of a local hospital. Nanos received a 15-day suspension, the single largest disciplinary penalty in his documented record. A grand jury reviewed the assault complaint and declined to indict. But the 15-day suspension stood. It is there, in the record, dated and documented. What followed was a dispute over something that reads, on the surface, as procedural. Fraudulent license plates. Nanos did not believe it was his responsibility to collect them. The department disagreed. The disagreement was the final one. By August 1982, Nanos was given a choice: resign or face termination. He resigned. His publicly posted resume for years listed his service with the El Paso Police Department as ending in 1984. It ended in 1982, a 2-year gap, quietly filled by the time he arrived at Pima County as a corrections officer. His resume also claimed a promotion to detective at the El Paso department. The Arizona Republic found no records to confirm that promotion ever occurred. His promotion to captain at Pima County was listed on the resume as occurring in 2009. It occurred in 2007. On March 10, 2026, the Arizona Republic published its findings. Nanos, contacted by email for comment before publication, did not address the disciplinary history. He did not address the resignation. His documented email response read, in its entirety, "That is your urgent request? Are you sure you do not want to go back to my high school and ask why I got swats from the principal? Good luck with your hit piece." The following day, the Pima County Sheriff's Department updated his official online biography. A spokesperson issued a written statement describing the inaccuracies as 2 clerical errors, administrative in nature, and not intended to mislead or misrepresent his work history. The statement did not address the disciplinary record. It did not address the allegation that he had resigned in lieu of termination. It corrected the dates and went silent. When a local news outlet asked Nanos directly about his work history as recently as December 2025, before the Arizona Republic investigation was published, he is documented to have misrepresented that history in his answer. That timeline matters. And this was not an old mistake left uncorrected out of administrative oversight. This was an active misrepresentation given under questioning months before Nancy Guthrie disappeared. And then there is the statement Nanos made at his second press conference on February 3, 2026, 2 days into the most high-profile investigation of his career, as reporters from every major national outlet surrounded him in Tucson. He looked at those reporters and said this. He said he was not used to everybody hanging on his words and then trying to hold him accountable for what he said. That sentence, from the man running the investigation into a missing 84-year-old woman, a man whose department had just processed a crime scene, confirmed biological traces at the point of entry, and began what would become a 47-day investigation with 0 arrests. He's not used to being held accountable. That is the documented record of the man who showed up at Nancy Guthrie's door on February 1, 2026. Not a theory, not a characterization. A timeline built from internal affairs cards, employment records, dated suspensions, and his own words on camera. And the record does not begin in 2026. It begins in El Paso in 1979, 1 week at a time. But here is what the disciplinary record alone does not explain. It does not explain why a man who spent more than 4 decades building a second career after a troubled first one would carry a specific grudge, a documented, publicly stated grudge, against the very federal agency now working alongside his department to find Nancy Guthrie. That grudge has a date, it has a name, and it may be the most consequential piece of background in this entire investigation. There is a moment in this case that most people watching the press conferences never see. It does not happen in front of cameras. It happens in the space between institutions, in the silence between a sheriff who controls a crime scene and a federal agency that wants access to it. To understand that silence, you have to go back 11 years, not to a missing persons case, to a cafe. In July 2015, Chris Nanos was appointed chief of the Pima County Sheriff's Department. He had not been elected. He was placed into the role by the County Board of Supervisors to complete the term of retiring Sheriff Clarence Dupnick. He had been with the department since 1984, working his way through corrections, patrol, internal affairs, homeland security, and criminal investigations over 3 decades. He finally had the top seat. And within months of that appointment, the FBI opened an investigation into his department. What investigators found when they began pulling records was a financial pattern that had been running since at least January 2011. Civil asset forfeiture funds, money seized from individuals during criminal investigations, allocated specifically for law enforcement operations, had been redirected, not in small amounts. Federal investigators documented that roughly $500,000 had been spent on items with no connection to crime fighting or prevention over a 5-year period. The investigation focused specifically on a fund designated for the Sheriff's Auxiliary Volunteers. The detail that made this case concrete was a cafe. Ratka's niece had taken over the operation of a restaurant inside the department's own headquarters in 2012. A no-county contract, no permit, rent-free. Department funds had been used to purchase equipment for the space, custom-designed chalkboards used as menu boards, commercial kitchen construction totaling more than $20,000. When the department was first asked about the expenditures, officials said the money came from RICO funds. They later changed that account and said it came from the county's general fund. The explanation shifted. The receipts did not. In October 2016, Chief Deputy Chris Radka, Nanos's second-in-command, was indicted on 7 federal charges: conspiracy to commit money laundering, theft of federal funds. The indictment alleged that Radke and others deliberately misled the Pima County Attorney's Office when submitting fund requests. Radke resigned immediately. He later took a plea deal, pleading guilty to 3 misdemeanor counts of theft of government property. Chris Nanos was not charged. He was not indicted. He told the Arizona Daily Star that an FBI agent had informed him he was, in his words, in the clear. What the FBI does not confirm or deny is the existence of its investigations, so that claim has never been independently verified. What is verified is this: between February 2015 and January 2016, Nanos himself submitted departmental requests for nearly $220,000 in transfers to the Volunteers Fund at the center of the probe. His name is on those requests. He submitted them. He was not charged for them, but they are documented. He lost the 2016 election for sheriff. The FBI investigation, according to multiple sources close to his department, had made the race impossible to win. He left office. He spent years outside the top seat, watching someone else run the department he had spent 3 decades building toward. And when he finally won it back, in December 2024, by 481 votes, the thinnest margin in the county's recent history, the grudge came with him. Former Chief Deputy Richard Castigar, who served under Nanos, put it plainly to the Daily Mail. He said Nanos has great disdain for the FBI. He said Nanos holds a grudge. He attributed that grudge directly to the 2015 investigation. And then he said something that connects that history to the present case in a way that cannot be dismissed as speculation. He said all the evidence in the Nancy Guthrie case should have gone to Quantico from the beginning. That is not a media commentator speaking. That is a man who sat inside that department and watched how Nanos operates. Nanos' own public response to the 2015 investigation tells you how he processes this kind of scrutiny. He went on KGUN9, a local Tucson station, and called the FBI's work total BS. He said he was absolutely upset. He challenged the Bureau to stand up and admit the whole investigation was baseless. That is the documented record of how Chris Nanos responds when the FBI applies pressure to something he controls. Now it is February 2026. An 84-year-old woman is missing from her home in the Catalina foothills. The FBI's Phoenix field office is deployed. Federal resources are available. The most advanced forensic laboratory in the country, the FBI's facility at Quantico, Virginia, is accessible and has dedicated rapid response protocols specifically designed for cases involving missing persons. On the mixed biological sample recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home, the sample that may contain the genetic profile of the person responsible is packaged and shipped to a private laboratory in Florida. A former chief deputy said all evidence should have gone to Quantico from the beginning. The sheriff who once called the FBI's work total BS made a different call. And that decision, that specific, documented, consequential decision, is where this investigation begins to fracture at the seams. The morning of February 1st, 2026, a Pima County Sheriff's deputy pulls up to a quiet residential street in the Catalina foothills. The desert air at that elevation is cold before sunrise, the kind of cold that settles into the bones when the mountains press down the temperature overnight. The deputy steps out of the vehicle and approaches the front door, and right there, at the threshold of an 84-year-old woman's home, is something that stops him cold. Biological traces, confirmed through laboratory analysis as Nancy Guthrie's, at the point of entry. That moment, that specific doorstep, is the most forensically important location in this entire investigation. Everything the case depends on was concentrated in and around that threshold. The suspect's movements, the contact points, the genetic material left behind in the chaos of what happened in those early morning hours. That doorstep was the beginning of every answer. What happened to it next is what forensic experts have since called unprecedented for a case of this magnitude. Chris Nanos arrived personally, and he told reporters afterward that he rarely responds to missing persons cases himself, that his personal presence at a scene is reserved for the most serious situations. He read the scene correctly from the first hour. Biological traces at entry. The doorbell camera physically removed from its mount. Heart medication untouched. Hearing aids left behind. He stood in front of reporters that afternoon and said plainly that they had a crime scene, that this was not a woman who left on her own, that what they found inside that house confirmed a violent, deliberate act had occurred. He was right about the scene. What happened to that scene in the hours that followed is where the record breaks down. The property was released in under 20 hours. No security tape stretched across the perimeter. No gatekeeper positioned at the entrance logging names and timestamps. No single law enforcement officer assigned to document every individual who crossed that threshold. The most forensically critical property in Arizona was released, and what followed was a sequence of access events that forensic death investigator Joe Scott Morgan later reviewed publicly and described as a complete breakdown of protocol. On February 13, 2026, 12 days after Nancy was reported missing, while the FBI was still actively processing the scene, a pool maintenance truck pulled up to the driveway. Ambiance Pool Service and Supplies, a company with no prior history at that address, a company Nancy had never been a client of. Drone cameras operated by reporters stationed at the perimeter captured the moment. Workers unloading equipment, to a Pima County Sheriff's deputy standing right there beside them, escorting them into the backyard. Workers were filmed skimming the surface and pulling nets through the water while federal agents were simultaneously working inside the residence. That same week, a landscaping crew arrived with equipment. A home health aide entered the property. Food delivery reached the address. Reporters from multiple national outlets walked to the front entrance and captured photographs. The biological traces, still visible on the ground, were documented from the exterior by press cameras before law enforcement had completed its processing. Content creators followed. Neighbors later reported that in the days after the scene was supposedly secured, there was no consistent law enforcement presence at the perimeter, controlling who came and went. You now consider what each of those visits deposited: skin cells, hair fibers, shoe impressions. Each person who crossed that threshold, whether they were a pool worker, a journalist, a landscaper, or a food delivery driver, left biological material on a surface that investigators needed to read with forensic precision. Every layer of outside contamination compressed against the material the suspect left behind. Every contact made the genetic picture harder to read and, critically, easier to challenge in a courtroom. Former New York police detective Michael Alcazar told CNN's Aaron Burnett directly. The crime scene had been contaminated by how many people had visited the site. He said investigators now had more DNA, more fingerprints, and more footprints layered over the original evidence, making it harder to process. That assessment came 9 days into the investigation. Before the pool crew, before the landscapers, before the full sequence of access events had even concluded. Joe Scott Morgan's assessment was more specific. He identified the absence of any gatekeeper as the structural failure. No single person with a log. No documented record of names and timestamps. Every individual who crossed that threshold became an untracked variable in a forensic equation that now has to account for all of them. And then the camera. Mounted on the roof of Nancy's residence, a camera no one had documented in the initial sweep of the property. It was discovered after the scene had already been released. Google engineers were brought in to attempt data recovery from the device. What they recovered were thumbnail images only, from motion-activated cameras covering the backyard, the pool area, and the side yard. The images showed family members, landscapers, and pool workers from visits in the weeks prior to February 1st. They did not capture anything suspicious. And they did not capture a single frame from the night Nancy disappeared. The most important night. The one night the cameras needed to have recorded. Nothing. On February 12th, the FBI returned to the property and erected a white tent over the front entrance. A law enforcement source confirmed to CNN that the tent was used to recreate nighttime conditions, replicating the darkness of the early morning hours of February 1st so that specialists could examine replica clothing and the backpack matching the suspect's equipment through the same visual conditions that existed during the crime. They were reconstructing what happened on a scene that had already been walked through by pool workers and press photographers. Now, here is the forensic principle at the center of all of this. Locard's exchange principle, the foundational law of forensic science established more than a century ago, states one thing with absolute consistency. Every contact leaves a trace. Every single person who walks through a space deposits something and takes something away. It is not a theory. And it is the operating principle of every forensic investigation conducted anywhere on Earth. What that principle means for this specific scene is this: every unlogged, untracked, undocumented visit to that property added variables to a genetic equation that investigators are now trying to solve in a laboratory. A defense attorney does not need to prove the suspect was never there. They need to prove the evidence cannot be trusted, because the chain of custody was broken before the processing was complete. And this scene gave any future defense attorney exactly the material they would need to make that argument. Criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Jenny Hutt, reviewing the case on News Nation, summarized it in one sentence. She said the scene had been described as grossly contaminated, and that contamination can destroy a prosecution long before it even begins. A $1.3 million lawsuit was subsequently filed against Sheriff Nanos related to his handling of the investigation. The doorstep where those biological traces were found was the beginning of every answer in this case. The question now sitting inside a laboratory in Florida, not Quantico, Florida, is whether enough of those answers survived what happened to that doorstep in the days that followed. Approximately 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home, in a field beside a desert road, a search team moving in a grid pattern stopped walking. On the ground in front of them, a black glove, a single glove lying in the dirt, in the open desert north of Tucson. And when investigators looked at the photographs the FBI had released of the masked individual standing at Nancy's front door, they saw it immediately. The gloves visible on that individual's hands, the style, the color, the cut, matched what was lying in that field. An FBI spokesperson would later confirm it directly. One of the recovered gloves appeared to match the gloves of the subject in the surveillance video. For a brief period, the entire investigation pivoted toward that glove. 16 total gloves were recovered in the surrounding desert during the search, most of them discarded by the search teams themselves during the extensive canvass. But this one was different. This one came from a field approximately 2 miles out, nowhere near the search corridor. The FBI packaged it overnight on February 12th. It arrived at the laboratory on February 13th. Preliminary DNA results came back on February 14th. The profile was run through CODIS, the FBI's national database containing the genetic records of more than 26 million individuals, primarily those convicted and incarcerated across the United States. No match, 0 hits. The person whose DNA was on that glove was not in the system. And investigators then moved to genealogical testing, a more advanced process that can identify relatives of an unknown individual even when that individual's profile is not directly in the database. Weeks later, News Nation confirmed the result. The DNA on that glove traced back to a restaurant employee working near the area. No connection to the case. No connection to Nancy Guthrie. The lead that the entire country had been watching, the one that was supposed to break this investigation wide open, was closed. One profile remained, the mixed biological sample collected from inside Nancy's home. DNA from more than one individual intermingled. Nanos told NBC News directly. The lab had informed him there were challenges with it. Challenges because mixed profiles are exponentially more difficult to isolate and interpret than single-source samples. Challenges because the chain of custody of the scene where that sample was collected had already been compromised before processing was complete. That mixed sample was sitting in a private laboratory in Deerfield Beach, Florida, a facility called DNA Labs International. Here is the forensic reality of that decision. The FBI Laboratory Division at Quantico, Virginia, operates one of the most advanced forensic processing facilities on Earth. It has dedicated rapid response protocols specifically designed for kidnapping cases. The Othram Lab in The Woodlands, Texas, one of the leading forensic genetic genealogy facilities in the country. They're instrumental in identifying suspects in multiple high-profile cases, has a direct pipeline with Quantico designed to accelerate the process of converting an unknown DNA profile into an identified individual. Othram co-founder Kristen Middleman reviewed the situation publicly and described it in one word: devastating. She said DNA Labs International is a traditional forensic lab that consumes evidence in order to build a standard genetic profile. She said she did not understand why the sample did not go to Quantico, given that the FBI can do this better and faster than anyone, and has a direct pipeline to convert the profile to an identity immediately. A Reuters law enforcement source put it more plainly. The decision, the source said, risks further slowing a case that grows more urgent by the minute. Nanos's stated reason was consistency. He told CBS News that his department had been using the Florida lab for years, that family DNA and other samples were already there, and that splitting evidence between two facilities added unnecessary steps and potential conflicts. He said it plainly: let's just use one lab, they have it all, the reports are generated, those reports are shared between both agencies, and we keep moving. What the FBI said contradicted that account directly. A U.S. law enforcement official confirmed to News Nation that the FBI had specifically requested the glove and the DNA samples from inside Nancy's home be sent to Quantico for processing. That request was denied. An FBI source told News Nation the Bureau had to ask to be involved, that they were not brought in proactively, but rather at the sheriff's request. And the same source said that whatever results the Florida lab produced, the FBI would likely need to retest the evidence themselves, adding time to an investigation where time is the one resource that cannot be recovered. The source's characterization of the decision was not diplomatic. They called it dumb. They said it was insane. And then came the contradiction that could not be explained away by institutional miscommunication or competing procedural preferences. On the same day, the same news cycle, the same 24 hours, the FBI told News Nation through an official source that a glove had been discovered inside Nancy Guthrie's residence. That same day, Nanos appeared on Fox News and stated definitively that no glove was ever taken from that house. No glove was ever found on that property. Same case, same evidence category, to two institutions speaking from completely opposite positions simultaneously to different cameras in the same city. Former Arizona Supreme Court Justice Andrew Gould watched those two accounts emerge in real time and chose his words carefully when he responded on Fox News. He said the sheriff had made mistakes that had impeded the investigation. A former justice of the state's highest court, selecting the word impeded, a legal term chosen with legal precision. Not mismanaged, not complicated, impeded. Then there was the second contradiction, which landed in the middle of a family's worst weeks. In early February, Nanos told reporters publicly that everybody remains a suspect. He repeated the word deliberately. Standard investigative language: keep all avenues open, eliminate no one prematurely. 14 days later, on February 16th, he reversed that position entirely. He stood in front of cameras and announced that all members of the Guthrie family, all siblings, all spouses, had been cleared. He called the online speculation against them cruel. He called it shameful. While he was saying that publicly, his detectives were still executing court-authorized searches at Annie and TOMMASO's property, still photographing rooms, still removing items. Annie's car remained in an evidence bay for weeks after the public clearance announcement. The Pima County Sheriff's Office has since spent over $200,000 on evidence processing in the Florida lab alone. The analysis of the mixed biological sample from inside Nancy's home is ongoing. Nanos, when pressed on the timeline, told reporters that processing could take weeks, months, or potentially longer. A mixed profile. Challenges confirmed by the lab itself. A Quantico pipeline that was bypassed. A glove lead that closed without a name. And one sample remaining, sitting in Florida. That may be the only forensic thread left in this case. The question is not whether the science can deliver the answer. Forensic genetic genealogy has identified suspects in cases far colder than this one. The question is whether what was left of that sample, after everything that happened to the scene it came from, is still intact enough to do the work. There is a number that predates every decision Chris Nanos made in the Nancy Guthrie investigation. A number that has nothing to do with DNA, nothing to do with crime scenes, nothing to do with missing persons. It is a number that was produced inside the Pima County Sheriff's Department itself. By the men and women who execute warrants under his command, process crime scenes on his orders, and ride in vehicles bearing his department's badge every single day. That number is 98.8, as in 98.8%. In January 2024, the Pima County Deputies Organization, the labor union representing the rank-and-file officers of the department, conducted a formal vote of no confidence in Chris Nanos. 86 deputies responded. 85 of them voted no confidence. The statement attached to that result did not mince its language. It described years of frustration at what the union called a lack of competent leadership and mismanagement from Sheriff Nanos and his senior command. That vote happened more than a year before Nancy Guthrie disappeared. It was not a reaction to how he handled her case. It was a verdict rendered on who he already was, by the people who know him most closely, in the building where the Guthrie investigation is now being run. Then, November 2024 arrived, election season, and with it, the sequence of events that would produce a federal lawsuit, a Board of Supervisors censure motion, and a margin of victory so thin it required a mandatory state recount. Nanos was up for re-election. His challenger was Lieutenant Heather Lappin, a 20-year veteran of his own department, running on the Republican ticket. Weeks before Election Day, Nanos placed Lappin on administrative leave. He confined her to her home during business hours. He restricted her ability to communicate publicly about the circumstances of her suspension. His department simultaneously placed a gag order on her, and his own attorney acknowledged the gag order existed while Nanos publicly denied placing one. Lappin's attorney, Steve Serbalik, said it plainly to the press. "It is unprecedented from my experience to have a candidate silenced by their political opponent." He said it goes against everything we think the Constitution stands for. Nanos also suspended Sergeant Aaron Cross, the president of the Deputies Union, the organization that had produced that 98.8% no-confidence vote. Cross had been photographed standing on a street corner holding a sign that read, "Deputies don't want Nanos." Cross filed a federal lawsuit against Nanos for violating his First Amendment rights. Democratic Supervisor Matt Hines introduced a formal censure motion to the Board of Supervisors, calling Nanos's actions a politically vindictive attempt to smear and silence his opponent. Former Republican Sheriff Mark Napier, Nanos's predecessor, issued a public statement calling it wrong on many levels and painfully transparent as a politically vindictive action. The Arizona Attorney General's office, after reviewing Hines's request for an investigation, declined to pursue one. The censure motion stalled along partisan lines on the board, and on November 5, 2024, Chris Nanos won re-election by 495 votes, a margin of roughly 0.1%, triggering a mandatory recount under Arizona state law. The recount concluded on November 27th in Pima County Superior Court. The certified final margin, 481 votes, out of 487,301 cast between the two candidates across the entire county. Lapin's statement after the recount results were certified was precise. She said she firmly believed that Nanos's decision to place her on administrative leave influenced the election outcome and tarnished her reputation. She retired from the department the following year. Cross, who had been photographed holding a sign and suspended for it, waited. He kept his job. He kept watching. And then February 2026 arrived. Now, watch the sequence of decisions inside this investigation from the perspective of a department where 98.8% of the rank and file have already declared they do not trust the person giving the orders. Retired FBI Special Agent Robin Drake, reviewing the investigation publicly, raised a structural concern that goes deeper than any single procedural error. He said that the no-confidence vote may have created an environment where the detectives actively working the Guthrie case are not fully briefing their own sheriff. He framed it this way: if investigators know that whatever they share with Nanos could end up misquoted in a solo Fox News interview the next morning, phrased incorrectly, timed badly, or directly contradicting something he told NBC an hour earlier, then protecting the case means controlling what flows upward. Nanos speaks from incomplete information. The public statements come out wrong. The press reports the contradictions. And the investigation drowns in noise while the real work happens around the sheriff, not through him. That framework, detectives working despite their leadership rather than because of it, was reinforced on March 13, 2026, when the Pima County Deputies Organization conducted a second vote of no confidence in Nanos. This time, the result was described by recall organizer Daniel Gutierrez as unanimous. Every deputy who participated, not 98.8%, 100%. It happened 12 days after the Arizona Republic published its investigation into Nanos's El Paso record, and 6 weeks into a missing persons case that had produced 0 arrests. On March 12th, one day before that second no-confidence vote, Gutierrez, a Republican congressional candidate, filed a formal recall petition against Nanos. He told the New York Post that Nanos had been an embarrassment to Tucson and to Pima County with this Nancy Guthrie case. He said deputies within the department wanted to launch the recall themselves, but were afraid of repercussions from Nanos if they put their names on it. He said the effort was bipartisan, that Democrats and Republicans in Pima County were equally disgusted. He said he was targeting approximately 135,000 signatures across 120 days. He had 500 volunteers working signature collection within days of filing. Nanos responded on March 17th, telling Tucson's 13 News that the recall was the right of the people and that he would always honor the will of the people. He called it democracy working as intended. And through all of it, through the no-confidence votes, through the recall filing, through the press conferences contradicting the FBI, through the questions about the lab decision and the contaminated scene, one image from this investigation circulated more than almost any other on social media. A photograph. Chris Nanos, sitting in the stands at an Arizona Wildcats basketball game, while a federal task force worked out of a building across town, while Savannah Guthrie recorded video messages to the person holding her mother, while the family waited. He was at a basketball game. At 1:47 a.m. on February 1st, 2026, the doorbell camera at Nancy Guthrie's front door disconnected from the security system. 25 minutes later, at 2:12 a.m., motion was detected near the home. 16 minutes after that, at 2:28 a.m., something happened that no investigator in this case can undo. explain away, or recover from. Nancy's pacemaker application disconnected from her iPhone. The phone was still inside the house. The pacemaker was not. That 2:28 a.m. timestamp is the closest thing this investigation has to a confirmed moment of departure. It is the forensic line between Nancy Guthrie being inside her home and Nancy Guthrie being somewhere else. Everything that came after it, every search grid, every camera canvas, every helicopter pass, was built around that single data point. 8 minutes later, at 2:36 a.m., a ring camera mounted on a home on Camino Real captured a vehicle moving south through the frame. Camino Real is a back road, a winding exit route out of the Catalina foothills that bypasses the major intersections, East Skyline Drive, North Campbell Avenue, that most drivers use to leave the neighborhood. Retired Pima County Search and Rescue Commander Bob Krieger reviewed the footage and was direct about what the road itself means. He said it is not a road you stumble upon. He said you have to be very planned to go in there. The homeowners, Elias and Danielle Strategouleas, told Fox News Digital that no law enforcement officer had canvassed their neighborhood in the 25 days since Nancy disappeared. Not once. Not a knock at the door, not a ring alert, not a canvass request. And their home sits 2.5 miles from Nancy's residence, half a mile outside the 2-mile radius that investigators had established as their canvas boundary. The Strategouleas footage, 12 vehicles captured between midnight and 6 a.m. on February 1st, including one car at 2:36 a.m., 8 minutes after the pacemaker went dark, was not surfaced by law enforcement. It was surfaced by the homeowners themselves after watching news coverage 25 days into the investigation. The search boundary was set at 2 miles. The most time-aligned piece of camera evidence in the public record sat at 2.5 miles. Nobody went there. Now, the pacemaker. Nancy's device is a Medtronic pacemaker, a cardiac implant that emits a low-power Bluetooth signal and syncs with an external application. That signal does not disappear when the application disconnects. It continues broadcasting at low power for as long as the device has battery and is within range of something that can detect it. Law enforcement sources confirmed to CBS News that investigators mounted a specialized signal detection device, described as a signal sniffer, onto a low-flying helicopter. The helicopter flew grid patterns over the desert terrain surrounding Nancy's neighborhood, moving slowly at low altitude, listening for that specific Bluetooth frequency. If the pacemaker was still transmitting, even faintly, the device could narrow the search area significantly. Then the technology and its precise capability were reported in the press before every grid square had been covered. President Trump was mid-sentence discussing the pacemaker tracking effort at a public event when White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt interrupted him to indicate the plane was ready. His partial public comments had already named the method. The search was still active. Whoever was responsible for Nancy's disappearance learned from news coverage that a helicopter could detect her pacemaker's signal. The signal has not been detected since. This is the second window in this chapter that cannot be reopened. Then, there is the border. Tucson sits 60 miles from the Mexican border. Interstate 19 runs due south, straight from the city to the port of entry at Nogales, Arizona. A private jet departed Tucson International Airport at 4:45 a.m. on February 1st, bound for Puerto Vallarta, New Mexico, roughly 2 hours after Nancy's pacemaker went dark. Missing persons investigator Steve Fisher noted the timing publicly, writing that he was certain the FBI had looked into it, but that the departure window was worth examining. The FBI has not commented on that specific flight. What is documented is the coordination gap at the border itself. Newsweek confirmed through official sources that U.S. and Mexican officials were briefed as a precaution. Mexican authorities stated there was no confirmed indication Nancy had been transported across the border. But when reporters asked Mexican officials whether a formal cross-border cooperation request had been filed through official channels, the account from the American side and the account from the Mexican side did not align. And then the volunteer organizations. And the Madres Buscadoras de Sonora, the Searching Mothers of Sonora, applied for a permit to conduct a field search in the Arizona desert. The organization, founded by Cecilia Flores after two of her sons disappeared in 2015 and 2019, has located more than 5,000 missing persons across Mexico, working desert terrain identical to what surrounds Tucson. They applied for the permit. The local sheriff's department denied the application, stating it could disturb the official investigation. Some members traveled to Tucson anyway, distributing flyers bearing Nancy's image near the perimeter. When they tried to search nearby areas, neighbors told them to leave. They encountered private property restrictions at every turn. The Pima County Sheriff's Department's official response to CNN was this: "The work is best left to professionals." Now, the United Cajun Navy submitted a 41-page operational plan to authorities. They received no response from the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Before Nancy disappeared, Nanos had reassigned his department's only search aircraft pilot to patrol duties. The pilot personally appealed the decision directly to Nanos. The appeal was denied. The Pima County Deputies Organization later confirmed to Fox News Digital that they had opposed the reassignment at the time because it left a critical law enforcement asset understaffed. When Nancy went missing, the department did not have a dedicated search aircraft pilot. 3 windows. The search boundary that stopped half a mile short. The pacemaker signal reported to the press while the search was still running. And the department's only search pilot, already gone before February, first ever arrived. None of them can be reopened. There is an ever-growing collection of yellow flowers sitting at the base of Nancy Guthrie's front door. People have been placing them there for weeks. Notes too, handwritten, laminated against the desert wind, tucked between stems. Strangers who never met her. People who watched Savannah on television for years and felt, in whatever way that kind of connection works, that they knew her family. The flowers keep coming. The answers have not. 47 days. That is where this case stands today, March 19th, 2026. 47 days since a garage door closed at 9:50 p.m. on a Saturday night in the Catalina foothills, and Nancy Guthrie's life was rerouted by someone who had planned it carefully enough to avoid leaving behind a single piece of evidence clean enough to build a prosecution on. Not yet. So the full reward picture for information leading to Nancy's safe return or recovery now sits at approximately $1.3 million. Her family is offering $1 million. The FBI has committed $100,000. And 88 Crime, the anonymous tip line serving Pima County, has added $102,000 of its own. That is $1.3 million sitting on a table, and not one person has claimed a cent of it. Retired FBI Special Agent Steve Moore has addressed that specific fact directly. He said the reason the reward has not been claimed is straightforward. The only people with knowledge of what happened to Nancy Guthrie are the people who did it. They have kept that knowledge from everyone else. There is no outside witness sitting on information, weighing whether to come forward. And there is no loose acquaintance who drove the getaway vehicle and is now losing sleep about it. The circle, Moore assessed, is sealed. That is a significant statement from a man who spent decades working federal investigations. It means this case cannot rely on someone calling the tip line with the missing piece. It means 40,000 tips, processed over 7 weeks, have not produced an actionable outside witness. What remains? What this case now depends on entirely: is the science. The FBI has confirmed that forensic analysis of blood pattern evidence is ongoing. Digital evidence continues to be processed. In the camera canvas of the neighborhood has been expanded to include footage from as far back as January 24th, 1 week before Nancy disappeared, consistent with the investigative theory that the person responsible conducted multiple prior visits to the property before February 1st arrived. The FBI's full-time task force remains operational. Retired agents familiar with the current state of the probe have described it publicly as red hot, a phrase that means actionable leads exist, that the investigation is not cold, and that movement is happening even when the press conferences produce nothing new. What the FBI is doing now, specifically, tells you something important about where the investigation has shifted. Agents have returned to Nancy's neighborhood and begun interviewing non-residents, landscapers, construction workers, contractors hired to work on homes in the Catalina foothills in the weeks and months before February 1st. News Nation's Brian Enton confirmed that investigators are specifically asking about a neighbor who moved out of the area before Nancy disappeared, and about several homes under construction in the vicinity. Former FBI Special Agent Steve Moore assessed that development publicly. He said investigators asking for the names of construction workers stands out. He said it is not a sign that the investigation is going backward. He said it is a sign that it is moving forward, that agents are retracing the suspect's possible access routes and cover stories in the neighborhood during the recon period. A neighbor has also come forward with a report of a suspicious individual seen near Nancy's residence in the weeks before February 1st. Consistent with the pre-crime surveillance timeline investigators have been building from the inside out. The FBI billboard campaign is now active across 4 states. Billboards bearing Nancy's image and the FBI tip line number have been posted in cities across Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, and California. Retired FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffin-Daffer described the campaign as a genuine awareness effort, but noted her reservations about the broad geographic spread of the placements. She said the approach shows little investigative direction in its targeting. She said a more focused deployment in specific corridors and cities relevant to the investigation's active theories would carry more forensic weight than a multi-state scatter. The FBI has not commented on the targeting strategy. The Pima County Board of Supervisors is scheduled to meet on March 24th, 5 days from today, to formally review and discuss Chris Nanos' employment history. That meeting is not a coincidence. It follows directly from the Arizona Republic's March 10th investigation, which documented the discrepancies in his publicly posted biography, the 26 allegations on his internal affairs record, the 37 days of documented suspensions, and the resignation in lieu of termination in El Paso in 1982. The board has no direct authority to remove a sitting elected sheriff, but a formal public review of his documented record, conducted in an open supervisors meeting, is a political event with institutional weight. The recall itself remains active. Daniel Gutierrez and his volunteer network are working toward the 120,000 verified signatures required within 120 days of March 12th to force a recall election. He has described the effort as bipartisan, Democrats and Republicans in Pima County equally driving it. If enough signatures are gathered, a recall election would be held. Any qualified candidate could run. Whoever receives the most votes wins the office. If Nanos wins, he remains in office, and the recall cannot be repeated during that term unless proponents absorb the full cost of the prior election. Retired FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell, speaking on Brian Enton's News Nation program on March 18th, 1 day before today, was asked directly whether removing Nanos from office would impact the investigation. Her answer was precise. She said no. And she said the continuity of the investigation would not be affected because it is not like Nanos is holding the whole thing together. That assessment cuts both ways. It means the investigation has enough structural momentum that a change in leadership would not derail it. It also means the investigation has been functioning for some period of time without that leadership being its central engine. That is where Nanos stands today. A recall underway. A board of supervisors review in 5 days. A second unanimous no-confidence vote from his own deputies on March 13th. A $1.35 million lawsuit filed against him and his department. And a national press corps that has spent 7 weeks documenting every contradiction between what he tells one outlet and what he tells another. He told KOLD on March 17th that the recall was the right of the people. He said he would always honor the will of the people. He said that is what makes democracy. He told NBC Nightly News last week that investigators believe they know why Nancy's home was targeted. He said the case is targeted, not random. He said he cannot be 100% certain of that, but that the evidence points there. And then he said the sentence that landed hardest. He looked directly into the camera and said this: "Don't think for a minute that because it happened to the Guthrie family, you're safe. No, keep your wits about you." Former FBI Special Agent Steve Moore, reviewing that statement, offered the assessment that has stayed with this case ever since. And he said that if the motive behind this act was not financial, if something other than money drove the decision to take Nancy Guthrie from her home at 2:28 in the morning, then whatever compelled that act does not disappear because it went undetected. It becomes reinforced. A person who executed a targeted act against a vulnerable individual and experienced no consequence has learned the most consequential lesson a person in that position can learn. They learned they can do it again. And Savannah Guthrie? She stepped back from covering the 2026 Winter Olympics for NBC. She made a brief, emotional appearance at Studio 1A in New York and told her colleagues 3 words. She said she was still standing. She said she still has hope. That is what this case has produced in 47 days. Not an answer, not a name, not an arrest. A mother who has been missing long enough for yellow flowers to accumulate at her door. A sheriff who is facing a recall and a supervisor's review in the same week. A DNA sample in a laboratory in Florida that may carry the only genetic answer left in this investigation. And a federal task force that agents describe as red hot. Still working, still moving, still building the scientific case that no tip line and no reward check has been able to produce. The science is what remains. Forensic genetic genealogy has identified suspects in cases far colder and far more compromised than this one. The FBI's expanded canvas, the construction worker interviews, the January 24th footage review. Those are not the movements of an investigation that is stalling. They are the movements of an investigation that is narrowing. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She needs her heart medication. She needs her hearing aids. She has been without both for 47 days. If you have doorbell footage, dashcam footage, or any visual record from the Catalina foothills area from the night of January 31st or the early hours of February 1st, or from January 11th or January 24th, the FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. Anonymous tips go to 88-CRIME at 5208-827463. That information does not expire. It does not become less useful as the days pass. One frame, one timestamp, one vehicle in the background of footage someone has not yet reviewed. That is the kind of thing that breaks cases like this. If this breakdown gave you something that other coverage has not, share it. Put it in front of someone who is following this case. That is how the pressure stays on. And that is how cases like this stay alive in the public record when the press conferences stop producing answers. Hit subscribe if you want to be here when this breaks, because this channel will be the first place we cover it when it does. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What does the documented record tell you about why this investigation has produced 0 arrests in 47 days? Is it the person who did this, or the system that was supposed to find them? Tell us what you think. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 47 days. The case is not cold. The science is not finished. And this channel is not going anywhere.